is the official kickoff of the DefCore committee for OpenStack. We are in what we're calling the Elephants cycle, which is the objective of trying to define the tests that we will use to determine what core is. And we'll spend time doing some background. Josh McKinney and I are co-chairs. Josh, you want to add? Josh, continue it?
No, I think you've got the best audio channel, and I think you should run forward with the agenda. I'll obviously pipe up as appropriate. Probably
Can't hear me.
Oh, nobody can hear me? That's fine. Okay, I'm switching to the phone line. Hold on.
That's interesting because Josh is the only one I can hear completely clearly.
Yeah, same here.
It's the challenge using audio to pick up with.
It's probably a coastal thing. We're on the West Coast. You're central.
Anyway, they're not shut off.
Okay. One of the things Josh and I wanted to state as a ground rule is that we expect people to work with us. So we spent I think close to 7 hours 2 weeks ago doing some organization and prep, and I'm assuming people have at least read the summary that we set up. Let's see. I'm trying to build a new to post the agenda. We came up with an agenda that we felt like was reasonable on this, and there was a whole bunch of background. So without going through a lot of background history, the goals for DefCore are really to drive a multi-cycle committee. We've started out of the Spider Committee from the last one, and with the principles that were presented to the board at the summit. And the goal for us at the end of the cycle is to have a working set of tests we can run, improve, that must pass for the beta phase. Very short order, and that's the real work for the cycle. There's a whole bunch of things that obviously have to be dealt with in addition to that to make all this stuff happen. And so we put together 2 meetings. There's this first meeting, and then there's a second agenda topic. That somebody could paste that into the ether. And we'll start making sure that we build the agenda for the next meeting. The next meeting is in 2 weeks. And so that, thank you. The reason for doing that is because an important potential change to the bylaws. And so if we're going to have a change to the bylaws, that must be done, we feel like, in the general election. We don't think we're going to get people out to vote for a bylaws change during the special elections. The goal here is if the committee believes that we must change, then we need to act within these next 2 meetings to put it to the board for approval, inclusion in the action. That is number 2 on the list, but it's one of our time items. So let me talk through this one that we discussed. If I can find it. Okay, so we spent a fair bit of time in the kickoff meeting working our line backwards from the idea that at the summit in Atlanta, the board should approve the slate of must-pass tests. And the way this has been discussed is that the board will approve a slate. It will be a line veto. The DefCore committee recommended this is the group, and so discussion just out of this committee would actually be the ones where we pick individual tests to figure out which tests are in or out. It would present a slate of tests at the summit. That slate effectively has to be in full draft mode at a month before the summit, which means that we actually have to have a working process for defining what the tests are a month before that, so people actually start seeing what the candidates are. So now we're at the summit. We've effectively got a rough draft of the test for discussion among the committee, so that we can then have the community draft and review before going at the summit. And then if you go back before that, that means that we have to have a criteria probably a month before that. Now we're talking February, in which we actually can pick what tests are our candidates. We've talked a fair bit, and we'll get into this in the agenda, about stack and how we want to start selecting some of those tests. That is the last item in this agenda, and if we run on schedule, we'll have time to start the session. But figuring out how we actually define those tests, we have to have that effectively defined in early February, so that we can then start actually doing the test work and working through the process. So we're mostly consumed with the potential for a bylaw change, which January is really a very active time for this committee to be figuring out how we're going to actually make these decisions. So that's effectively the timeline. Do people understand that? Is that we have discussion?
Hey, it's Jonathan Bryce. Rob, you've been pretty choppy. I don't know if that's your connection or.
As Rob indicated, I think it's going to be very difficult to operate in the manner in which we are currently operating and operating in the current set of bylaws, because they really do lock down the manner in which both the which is as the way in which trademarks are used. And I think we're going to be changing things as we move forward over time. And I think it's very important that we have the flexibility to do that without having to go through this extremely onerous amendment process.
Could someone explain what?
At a high level and a little bit of granularity at some point during the discussion today, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah,
wait.
Rob. Okay, well, I've sort of finished the context, so I could go through the proposed changes now, or we could delay that to another time.
So, what is this is Jonathan again. I'm from what Rob talked about, it sounds like the end goal is to get a set of tests proposed that are required to basically incorporate into different trademark usage programs
for commercial products and services.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to understand still is the which part of that requires a bylaws change, and the thinking behind that, because it seems like that's actually in the agreements that we've had 100 companies,
So
and so that's.
And we designed the original trademark policy, which is still the policy, to accommodate that exact sort of scenario. So I'm also confused as to what the reason is why we can't do the thing that Rob says we need to do without a bylaws change. I'm still confused about that.
Wait, hold on just a second, because you guys are jumping into the next topic.
Okay.
I want to have to. I think the majority of this meeting will be this topic, and I want to structure it a little bit as we kick it off. So Jonathan, let me step back for a second on that. I want to close on the timeline and make sure that people are comfortable with the timeline and they understand what's going to start happening. Because once we commit this timeline and start communicating it, then we're going to need, that's going to be things that the community starts looking for as deliverables out of the committee. So I want to make sure that everybody understands what we're saying, right? January is discussion of the criteria. February is lockdown for the criteria. March, we have to have a draft ready for approval, and then April is approval.
So I guess, Rob, the question I had, I thought when I was reviewing some of the notes, and not to try to skip ahead to the next question, is there was something about refstack.org allowing foundation members to potentially vote on what they wanted as must-pass tests. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, is that idea factored into this timeline, or is that a follow-on to an initial set of must-pass that the board certifies in Atlanta? And I'm only concerned about that because that's a big change to sort of implement and sort of get locked down by February and move forward in that context. So I don't want to jump directly ahead to the must-pass test section, but it seems related to whether or not I know whether I can sign up for the timeline, because I love the goal. I just don't know enough yet to know practically if it seems feasible.
So that's a great question, and I skipped over something important, which was that at the Atlanta Summit, we're bringing the Havana tests, and part of the thing with the Havana tests is, in a sense, they're getting a little bit long in tooth from that perspective, right? It's that first set will most likely be small, and to an extent will be one of the things we have to do is figure out how enforceable we want to make that set of tests. And so part of our future discussion will be, are the tests that we bring the Havana tests, are they a definitive set, or are they a preliminary set? Are they, how official do we want to make them? And I'm not sure that we can know that answer until we get into the February timeframe and see how the results look.
Yeah, it sounds to me like this is an operating goal that we're going to sign up for and run hard for, but the realization that we may run into practical issues that we may adjust to. And that's the way I'm hearing it to be interpreted, in which case I like the goal and I like the timeline setup in terms of moving quicker.
I think you've exposed my favorite modus operandi. Yeah, I think that we want to be able to try and do this. We're going to have to communicate to people to participate in this process. If we don't get participation, then we won't be able to use that as it's certainly not. So actually, let me step all the way back. User voting is definitely not the only and potentially not even the primary criteria for what the test should be. And so we want to talk about that. But if we can incorporate that type of feedback in the test definitions, then I think it's an important one to include. But
that sounds very reasonable to me, and I generally like the idea of starting to try to accelerate to get something done by Atlanta, because even if it's a starting point and in the evolution, there had been a timeline. I want to go back a couple months ago that I think you had laid out that sort of said we had to have this done in 2014, which feels way too slow. I think having the first set of defined stuff that the board is behind by Atlanta should absolutely be our target.
Right, it's going to be an evolving process. The more defining those criteria, I think, is going to be where the fun is in this cycle for DefCore, and including users as part of it is a priority. But if we can't do it, we can't do it. I don't want to slow us down. We're saying the same thing, Troy. So with that caveat, that in our timeline, we will flex based on what criteria we can determine. Are people comfortable with the timeline? And it is aggressive.
Yeah, I think it's better to have an aggressive timeline. We worked pretty aggressively over the summer, so no reason to slow down now.
Good.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think we should go for it.
And we'll get into this in a lot more detail when we talk about the definition. That really is the meat of the work with this. Okay. Cool. So we'll communicate that this timeline is one of the things that we're coming out from the meeting with. The next item, which is the bylaws change, is if we need one, and this is really the discussion for today. Is if we need one, and if we need one, what it should be. So I want to break this into different pieces. Mark, and I haven't had a chance to read the red line you sent. I apologize. And let's hold off on the we can do this either way. I'm tempted, Jonathan. You and I talked about this for a long time, and I think you've got some very reasonable arguments for why we don't need one, and how it's not necessary to put bylaws change through. What I would suggest we do, it's a little bit backwards, but I think it'll actually be easier if we let the people who think we need a bylaws change sort of lay out what they're thinking and what their issues are, with the understanding that that's presenting a position, and then we should, if you don't mind holding off, we'll talk about if that change is needed after we've heard what the proposed changes are. I think it would be very frustrating for people who believe that the change is needed to talk about it in vacuum. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, Rob, I think that makes sense. Is Irene on the call?
She is.
Okay, I wonder if she could actually, or you and Irene, can you give some context? If we're going to have Mark Radcliffe walk through the things, you want to give some context on how you guys put that together?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the context is, I mean, we looked at the bylaws, and Mark and I looked at this, and Mark looked at it first and cited it as an issue. I do, I'm of the mindset that I think we need to have a bylaw change in order to get clarity around the issue. I understand that there's some folks who don't agree with that, so I think that it would be helpful to kind of walk through that first, kind of why we think that there is the need for the change. And I mean, it's really two types of changes, right? The changes around the definition, and how we're looking at core and things like that, but it also the changes around the trademark policy as well. Mark, do you want to walk us through that at a very high level? I think that would be helpful to kind of set the stage here. Mark, you may be on mute.
Sure, let me set up as to what the current situation is, why we're on mute, why we think a change is needed, and what the proposed changes are. Does that sound like a good process?
Well, can you do it in reverse? I mean, if there were proposed changes and then we talked about the why, because the why is going to turn into a larger discussion that may be easier to have if we've got the specific changes in mind.
Right.
Okay, fine.
That's a good point. Okay, good point.
And once again, I'm kind of a neutral on this. I want to make sure that the corporate governance works. I don't have a particular desire to change the bylaws, because particularly these changes are going to be painful. But I do think, given what I understand what people want to do, that a bylaw change probably makes sense. Okay. So the proposed changes are two types. The first, and probably the less problematic, I guess, or what I hope to be less problematic, is to shift the changes to the trademark policy out of what I would call lockdown. There's a series of provisions in 9.1 and 9.2D that require basically everybody needs to vote on it separately. The board, the platinum members, the gold members, and the individual members. So the trademark policy was included in that. There was a little bit of flex where there was a possibility that we would adopt some type of testing and certification requirements, and therefore until January 31st of 2013, the board alone could change the trademark policy. That didn't happen. So the current trademark policy, as I said, any change to it require a vote of 2/3 of the board, 2/3 of the gold members, 2/3 of the platinum members, and majority of the individuals voting, where there's at least 25% of the individual membership voting. I just think that, this trademark policy, I think, is a good reflection of where we were and where we thought we'd be, when we started. I think we've already are doing things which are not within the scope of the policy. Moreover, okay, so I'll just leave it at that and not get into the why. Okay. The second change is a change in section 4.1b and 413, which describes the manner in which the definition of core is set and what the effect of that definition is. And what I took away from the board meeting in Hong Kong was that we needed to move this to something that was less rigid and more process oriented. And so that's what I did in 4.1b and 4.13, is to try to set up a procedure rather than focus on, for example, modules. So I think, there's, right now the assumption is that there are certain modules that are going to be designated as core OpenStack. And based on what I'm seeing in what's going back and well, based on what happened at the board meeting and also what we're seeing going back and forth, I think the whole idea of modules may be not relevant or not the direction in which we're heading. So those are the two changes that are proposed.
I kind of just make one point, Mark. I like the idea of proposed change giving us more flexibility in the future too. So I think what it's providing is the ability for us as an organization then to move forward without having to go through additional bylaw changes in the future. So it's giving us a little bit of breathing room as well.
So that describes the changes. Should we delve into why, or do you want to have further discussion about what?
Well, so I'm not sure the changes that are proposed in this red line meet the goals that we discussed at the kickoff meeting. And specifically, I think the goal is to have a process to amend the language in 413 is still as a collection of modules. And really what we were trying to recognize in the core process is that it's a set of passing tests, which was that original goal in the bylaws to say up until this date we can amend by referencing fit. Say essentially there's a test suite that defines what is core and what is not.
Language on the technical side, we need to make changes to make it conform to what we were thinking on the technical side of the percent. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I think the process piece is saying, hey, let's make this defined by a process and not as requiring a massive amount of voting to amend over time is the right goal. And I think we've got the process changes in there, but the technical language is still referencing additions and deletions as recommended by the technical committee.
Well,
it's really not what we're saying.
But the question is, do we want to lock? I'm perfectly willing to change this. This is a first draft, but do we want to lock ourselves into a procedure that requires us to have testing tests? Is it possible in the future at some time we'll decide to go back to this, let's identify the module approach?
Yeah. So the other thing too that is the trademark usage right now has.
Sorry, okay, well, hey Rob, while folks are getting back on the dial-in, because I know Jonathan and it sounds like Sean Roberts both have some points to bring up there.
Yeah.
Do you want to summarize kind of the thinking that got us to saying, hey, we really need to probably amend the bylaws, and here's why?
Yeah. Actually, I was trying to pull up my notes from our discussion about exactly that, because we have a really good discussion here. So we identified that there were 3 problems with the bylaws in discussion. One was the trademark policy, and hold on, I'm going to post the.
I closed the Hangout, Rob.
No worries.
I posted into IRC.
He just beat me to it. Yes.
Most of these folks aren't in that IRC channel.
No, they're not.
Didn't know there was an IRC.
The DefCore.
We have too many channels here. It's kind of possible to.
I know.
Discussion.
All right, so where were we?
Okay, so Rob is going to summarize the thinking that got us to saying, hey, we probably need a bylaws change. It will be challenging to summarize because it was like 2.5 hours of discussion out of a 7-hour meeting. But it is worth summarizing. I think the original reason we even looked at it is just realizing there wasn't consistency between the 3 documents that reference either OpenStack core or the trademark policy controlling the mark. And it made sense to, at the very least, eliminate some of the confusion around what is the term core being used for and what portion of our various governance documents do people need to look at to understand the rules. But then when we looked at the section that probably was going to be the surviving section, it made very specific reference to a set of modules that would be proposed to the board by the technical committee, and the board would approve or not the additions and deletions. And that was really how we were thinking about that originally. The challenge was we've evolved since then, where most of the OpenStack projects are modular, and we don't use the term plugins because the TC folks tend to get really annoyed when we start talking about technical details. But they do, a majority of the OpenStack projects now have some kind of plugin model where the extensions may or may not be included in any particular distro, and this was producing some of the interop concerns that we were hearing back from the user community. An easy example of this is floating IP support, which most folks assume would be in Nova, but it's actually not. It's an extension. And so the approach that we started taking with this, with building RefStack and defining tests, was saying it's not enough to say this project or this module is in or out of core. We have to be more explicit about the set of API capabilities that folks should expect to be enabled. And we came to this process-based definition of saying, okay, these tests should pass, and these critical pieces of code should be included, and that led us to those 10 governance principles. And then looking back from those governance principles, we didn't really have language in the bylaws that allowed us to do what we were doing, which was to say we've defined these principles, and now we're going to run this test suite and say things that pass this suite can use these marks.
Right. So, right. I think you gave a good summary. I'm going to reiterate the specific points that we outlined in the discussion from the notes.
Yeah.
From that. So we broke it down. There was the trademark policy refers to OpenStack as a distro. That we talk about projects, not programs, and actually there's an agenda topic here to talk about the project program item in itself, and then there's specifically listing a set of projects we're limiting, and I'm getting to play my favorite role, which is I'm hearing a lot of different positions on this. All of them have good merit, and so I know that those 3 statements in themselves, some people interpret different ways. So we're going to have to discuss those items. The bylaws, we had a note about the bylaws trademark piece and actually conference of the trademark. We had an issue outlined with licenses already being granted against a FITS test, and the FITS test hadn't been defined. Although I've heard several arguments that what we're proposing is effectively creating the missing FITS test. And the idea to have a change to a process-based definition of core. So rather than saying these projects are in or out, to have a more nuanced. These parts of NOVA are in, these parts are not in, and that none of that was reflected in the bylaws. Okay. Did I miss pieces? Those were specifically the things that we had. There's a general one to me, which is just that it's confusing, and that we go round and round on what this means and what these words mean and how we should apply them. And I will channel Jonathan for a moment, but that doesn't mean we have to change the bylaws.
Right, but I think if it merits changing, let's try to get some. I mean, to the points raised. I think that was a great summary, both Josh and Rob. But I think to the points raised, if we can get, if we've got to make the changes anyway, let's get some additional clarity around there and give us a little bit of breathing room and flexibility as we move forward too. Because recognizing, look, it's different today than it was when we created the bylaws, right? There's been things that have changed, and that's actually a great thing because we're moving forward and we're adapting as needed.
Yeah, I think the other thing is there are portions of what we built into the bylaws that are flexible and amenable to change. The trademark policy itself, for instance, is referenced but is allowed to be changed over time, and that seems appropriate because we're now debating and deferring for the future discussions of, okay, what does it mean to be OpenStack compatible? What about the OpenStack Commons definition? And we have this set of marks around OpenStack storage and OpenStack compute and built on and powered by that I think we were trying to guess at future trademark requirements in a lot of ways when we put those marks together. And that the trademark policy can explicitly be amended, but this concept of core was quite central to the bylaws, and I think we were trying to be very careful about protecting it, but we may have been too careful and left ourselves in a bind where we produced a lot of confusion because we haven't been able to go back to the community and say, here's the place where core is being evolved. Look at this. This is what you can rely on.
Excuse me, this is Mark Rakoff. I think there may be a misperception about the ability to change the trademark policy. The trademark policy is among the special provisions that can only be changed with these special votes. And so it's actually locked in the way it is. There is some flexibility for the foundation to take actions and approve things, but that tends to be individual exceptions to the policy as a whole.
Well, so the trademark policy is the overarching kind of guidelines for trademark usage, and then the trademark policy has several extensions to it, which are
sort of implementations that are consistent with that.
Yeah, those are the licenses, and those get to the commercial use licenses that Josh was talking about with built for, powered by, et cetera.
And the policy itself says you need to have a license for certain things.
Yeah, the license is up to the foundation. What the foundation does in the license is within its control.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, so there's, there are kind of a couple of different layers to this that are interrelated, but, I agree that, I mean, part of what I was hoping to hear, and I don't know if I fully understand this yet, is, I mean, I think that a bylaws change could help to bring clarity around some things. But if we've got a tight timeline like this, making it a requirement and a dependency could impact what I think is the highest priority goal, which is getting to some of these really, really important questions around interop and testing and compatibility. And if you look at the sort of the pieces of the puzzle, the bylaws give the board flexibility to define what is included in core from a software perspective and what is not included in core. It actually says the board has basically sole discretion to add, remove, delete, split, the technical committee can make recommendations, can make requests, but it's up to the board to decide that. The trademark policy, the actual policy itself, which is fairly locked down, deals with restricting usage of the OpenStack wordmark and logo to community usage, to discussion, development of the community of the software, that kind of thing, and then allows for commercial use to be defined in licenses. And we have several license programs, and we have I have to go back and look, but I think probably pretty close to about 100 companies who have signed on to those licenses. And those licenses, each of them have different technical requirements that need to be met in order to comply with that license. Those requirements can change, but they currently include a software requirement. So you need to be running some portion of the software, as well as a testing requirement. The test doesn't exist, but it sounds like that's one of the things that we're talking about here is creating those tests. And if we do that, then one of the things that's nice about an accelerated implementation schedule like we're looking at doing is everyone has already agreed to those licenses, and it's a matter of figuring out what kind of a reasonable phase-in period we give people to comply with the test before we kind of implement the restrictions that are available in the licenses. But
Jonathan, let me jump in here for a second, because one of the issues that came up during the discussion pre-kickoff was that the license agreements that have been used are not public. And in fact, I dragged mine up on the screen in the office, and one of the other participants pointed out they assumed that was legally confidential, which it isn't. But it's also not public or transparent, and there's nothing in the bylaws that provides any assurance to the community that all of the licensees of the mark are subject to the same restrictions. In other words, the goal of the bylaws would be to say, hey, the foundation will exercise control of the trademark according to this policy, and the policy says we will license the trademark out to commercial interests according to these technical guidelines. But the actual details of the reference to fits and the reference to including certain portions of software are in those licenses, and they're not public anywhere. So the concern is the community has nothing they can rely on for interop to say, we know that everything that's licensed to use this mark is going to pass a set of tests, because the actual legal document that requires people to pass a set of tests is not public, and it's not even included in the bylaws by reference.
Josh, hold on. You've made that statement about 5 times now, and it's actually incorrect. So let me just jump in here, please, before we just keep saying that.
Sure.
All of those license agreements are on the website, and they openstack.org/brand.
I'm on that page right now.
And click on distribution and
so on the left there are commercial logos, and each of those license agreements is linked there. This is actually the only way that those license agreements get signed, is we send people to this web page. There's an EchoSign agreement. It's all automated. The text of the license agreement is on the page. It's you can see exactly what everybody has signed and what they've agreed to.
And the FITS requirement is actually not in the license. It's in the guidelines which is included by reference, but it's on the website as well.
Use logo guidelines here. Okay. So this is, I guess this was my confusion, is because this isn't how we license it.
Yeah, that was like predating the foundation. I was like right as the foundation started, we were moving everything online, and so yeah, that's why.
Gotcha. Awesome. So if there's any way we can collate the list of licenses that have been granted, I mean, that might be in the same way that we have a full list of members now, right? We have here's the member directory. You can go through and figure out who all the foundation members are. If there's any way to collate the list of all of the foundation, the mark licensees, is that possible?
Yeah, I mean it is possible. It's one of the things that we actually are working on right now. I mean, we rolled out the training marketplace recently, and as we are
kind of EchoSign is a little bit of a disconnected system, and that's where we have all these documents stored. But we actually have some development work going right now to link the actual contracts back to people's corporate accounts where they have their training programs and their the different information about products and services that we publish on the website. So this is it's something that there's a technical barrier to just flipping the switch tomorrow, but it's definitely the direction that we want to go, because we want to get all of this linked into a single system for our our usage and for all of the different companies. But I think it makes sense to show that as well, so that people can see who's a signatory to different agreements.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that would, I think, clarify a huge amount of this.
And do we have a sense as to how many different versions of the agreement there are?
How many different versions of like a powered by agreement?
Or how many different versions of the trademark licenses? Because or maybe you could tell me that they're all the same. But my sense is that that the people taking the license from the LLC had a different agreement than the agreement that we've been using.
No, when we switched over, I think the only sort of substantial change was changing LLC to foundation. The licenses themselves are generally fairly they're pretty lightweight. They all fall under, as Mark said, what we call the restricted use guidelines. And those guidelines have that's where the bulk of the kind of the requirements. I think that's where the FITS requirement is incorporated, and it talks about proper usage of naming and how you can't use the OpenStack name and how you can, and that kind of thing. And so that is the same across all of the different licenses. It's actually just incorporated into the different licenses, and then whether it's an OpenStack cloud license or an OpenStack distribution license, there's just a pretty small chunk of distinct text for the different license.
Yeah, and I would just say that
Sorry,
go ahead.
Ask sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to ask on the product naming piece of it, because one of the questions that popped up is that fairly uniform across in general, or has the foundation granted exceptions to that? Because that's something that popped up.
Yeah, that's actually, Eileen, exactly what I was going to say, which is probably the biggest. No problem. Yeah, the biggest meaningful difference in the rights that you get between the different agreements is probably with respect to the word mark. So using OpenStack in your product name. So for example, with Powered by OpenStack, your product would be, Bob's Lawnmower Powered by OpenStack, and then so there's kind of this modifier like Powered by, and kind of keeps the OpenStack word further away from your brand, so to speak, or your product name. And then with the OpenStack distribution and OpenStack Cloud, which are two of the newer programs, there is a right granted in there to actually call your product like Bob's OpenStack, which was I guess a greater level of power, if you will, given to the licensee in terms of how they can use OpenStack. So those two particular agreements have a little bit broader rights.
In terms of our implementation of it, we are pretty strict about. We've definitely, I would say, broken some hearts from people who have wanted to do things. But I mean, we feel like it's the consistency is important on it overall. One other point too that just
because that's what I was kind of going towards as well, Jonathan, is the consistency. So in general, it sounds like it's been fairly consistent in terms of practice on that piece as well. Even though, like to your point, some folks may not have been happy with the answer, but at least it's consistent across the programs. It sounds like. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you know, what happens quite regularly, Eileen, is that things do pop up that are not compliant, where we have to, you know, call those folks up and say, hey, you know, maybe you didn't see all the T's and C's, but you know, you need to have a license. The license has these requirements, and this is not going to, you know, match. And so that there's a little bit of a whack-a-mole game that goes on, but it's just the way it is with all trademarks. But we certainly do our best to apply them fairly and equally to each category based on what is written in the agreement.
Yeah, we have a monitoring service that we use for to do automated monitoring, and then we have our trademark legal firm spends time on that as well, and you know, if it's something that's more involved than just, you know, generally we try to do the initial sort of contact, and then if necessary, you know, we get them involved to take it to a more serious level.
So let me ask you a question, a clarifying question. And Jonathan, I didn't mean to be attacking anything about how the legal documents were laid out. So I apologize if you felt like I was grilling in on you. The license for the OpenStack distribution logo, as an example, the technical requirements summary on the page says that it has this requirement to ship 100% of the Nova code, 100% of the Swift code, to expose the associated APIs without modification, and that the primary purpose must be to run a functioning operational instance. But those aren't in the guidelines document below. In other words, the OpenStack restricted use logo guidelines cover specifically powered by OpenStack and storage powered by OpenStack and built for OpenStack, but not OpenStack Cloud or OpenStack distribution. And so there's no reference to fits covering OpenStack distribution or OpenStack Cloud. Now, I guess the question, the meta question here that brings us back to DefCore is, can we as the DefCore committee and or the board amend these license agreements and the pages on the website that describe the summaries of these sponsorship requirements and et cetera without a bylaws change? In other words, can we monkey with this and say, no, the licensing shouldn't require 100% of these two projects' code. It needs to require passing tests that include a reference to a whole bunch of other possible projects. Can we do that without a bylaws change?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was the original intention of layering the agreements like this. And to the other point about you know, kind of moving the trademark policy itself from a high bar change to a low bar change. Actually, I think, Josh, this is a point that you may have brought up when we were having the drafting committee calls. But one of the things that the trademark policy sort of has in there in a kind of written in stone way is the right of the community to use the OpenStack name and logo for community purposes, you know, for non-commercial purposes. Yes. And by moving it, and again, like I think, I personally, there's appeal to me of making it more flexible and easier to make changes in different areas, especially as we've worked on some different bylaws amendments. But I think that I know that you mentioned this several times during the drafting process. By putting something into section 9.1, it only requires 2/3 of the board to make a change, and 2/3 of the board is corporate controlled. And and right now I think that's not an issue at all. We have great board members, but over the long term, as this thing grows and changes over the next couple of decades, and different companies come and get involved, you could actually see a scenario where gold and platinum members on their own could implement a change to the trademark policy that restricted all usage by anyone who wasn't a gold and platinum member, or removed that community usage, or did different things like that. And I think that sort of that view of the OpenStack trademark as at least partially a community asset was part of the thinking in putting it into the higher bar section of amendments.
Well,
yeah, and I totally, I remember that, and I think it was exactly the right goal, and I still think it's the right goal. I was more concerned about can we make the details of the process not influenced directly by the bylaws, because the chances of us, the size of the community at this point is the chances of us getting a bylaws amendment around something this detailed are going down dramatically with every passing day. The community is too big to get a 25% majority of people to care about changes to process amendments in the language.
Yeah, and this is Mark Radcliffe. There's nothing that says we can't require like half of the independent directors to vote for the change too. But my concern is exactly the one that was voiced, which is if we even, maybe we can shoehorn what we're doing into the, parts of the whole structure, maybe into the license or something like that. But I think at some point it's going to be impossible to change these bylaws simply because people will not be interested enough to vote. And if we think that we need a change, and I frankly think we do, we really are. I mean, we can probably find ways to shoehorn this in, but the problem is we're fundamentally shifting the way that we intend to operate. And I would prefer to give us enough flexibility to do that without having to go back to the membership every time. Because theoretically, once again, if we're outside the scope of the bylaws, then the things we're doing are not properly authorized from a corporate governance point of view, which could get very very messy in the context where you have a real trademark fight on your hands, and somebody says, well, yeah, but this license agreement is not authorized by the way that the bylaws are set up, and then you get into so you add an additional issue to enforcement of the trademark.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I said earlier, I think that I'm not just directly and violently opposed to a bylaws amendment to clarify things, but if I think that we can accomplish the goals of testing and interop potentially without it, and if we wanted to move along on that path, I would just say let's do it, but let's not necessarily make it a dependency that throws off those other goals that I think are extremely important and valuable.
So this is, I think, something that's going to be ongoing as far as the discussion goes and the rationale. And what I'm hearing is that there's definitely some confusion and room for tweaking. We're not entirely sure where, and we're not entirely sure if the community can accept it. Jonathan, you're raising the point of, do we even really know what we want it to be? That underlying a lot of what you're asking to me is the don't be hasty. Sounds like to me. Is that an accurate assessment? Sort of, there's a lot of moving parts. Don't be hasty.
Well, I mean, I think that that some of these things like shifting the trademark from a high bar to a low bar, I would say definitely let's not be hasty, because that's kind of a fundamental. Mark Radcliffe pointed out some options for making it not something that could just be done by the gold and platinum members. I think thinking about those kinds of issues would be important, because it is changing the rights of the community on one of the very key assets that OpenStack has. So in that regard, I would say yes. But I think the other point too is these license agreements are explicitly allowed in the existing trademark policy, and they're set up in a way where
the challenge is that 4.1b defines the use of the OpenStack trademark around core OpenStack projects without referencing the trademark policy. So that was the proposed change, was really to say, hey, we've got licenses, they're in the trademark policy, we've got a trademark policy referenced by the bylaws. Let's clean up the bylaws so that it only references the trademark policy, rather than 4.1b, which has all this language around the other modules which are part of the OpenStack project but not the core OpenStack project may not be identified using the OpenStack trademark except when distributed with the core. And that whole language is super confusing to the community because it doesn't match what's in the licenses.
Right.
It's
It also doesn't match it also doesn't match this concept of programs versus project, which is also troubling. That we need to talk. We need to talk about that. And one of the things I want to do is I want to see if I can move us forward on this. So because I know that we're going to need more time. So this is let me try and boil this down to 3 questions. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, I think that Josh's point is a good one, and that is probably I don't know. You could argue that might be the most discussed sentence in OpenStack's history. In 4.1b, which is probably an indication that it could use with some it could do with some clarification. But I think that my point is not let's not clarify it. It's just that maybe we can decouple that as a requirement, because I would just hate to set it up as a requirement and then for whatever reason we end up not being able to get it through, and then we can't make progress on the rest of the steps after that.
So I'm trying to break this down into 4 questions that we can exit this topic with, and what I want to do. Josh and I spent a lot of time. We want to try and move this through with consensus, but at some point say enough. So I think I have 4 questions, and they're on the Etherpad if you want to read ahead, that we can get consensus and move forward. First is, do we need to make changes to the bylaws to improve how we handle trademarks for core? I think everybody's saying yes on that at some point that we're, especially as we move forward, it seems like we're going to expose some inconsistencies. I'm not saying when. I'm not saying what they are, but I think everybody feels like everything I've heard is, yeah, we probably could do better. Anybody flat out think no, the bylaws don't need to be changed?
I think there's an opportunity to improve them if we want to take it.
Okay. So
Rob, stating
Rob,
slightly less.
I have a series of questions. These are leading questions. I have a series of questions.
But Rob, let's just be clear. I don't think we would ever say we can only do this if the bylaws get changed, because that would lock us in. That would lock us into a position which, if we don't get the vote, and I think that's a possibility, then we couldn't proceed. Then we'd have to go back. So just so we're all clear, right?
Well, that's my next question, Mark. So the second question is, all right, if we think they need to be changed, are the changes required to complete the work for this cycle? And I think the answer is no on that. Right? We're not blocked by the bylaws.
Well, I mean, so I think we can take that position. Let me describe where it's a little bit weak. I mean, the bylaws, you could set it up so that you go through this whole process and the board essentially adopts this testing procedure to identify what is core. The problem with that is that you've got something in the bylaws which expressly states if you want to change the trademark policy to use a test approach, you need to change there's an implication, pretty strong one, in the bylaws that the current trademark policy is not set up to use a testing criteria for use of the mark, because it has an ability for the board to amend the bylaws until January 31st, 2013 to permit that. So the implication of that would be that isn't the way the trademark policy works right now. Now, once again, we have a lot of flexibility in what we put into the license agreements, although I don't know if the license agreements can be amended, or if all the license agreements can be amended at a stroke. I mean, so that would be something we'd have to look at. I mean,
I think we can, based on what Jonathan and Mark were saying, because they already require fits tests, and we could say that the elephant cycle is effectively defining the fits test.
So the only problem with that is that the licenses that were granted explicitly say, and the early ones didn't, but the new ones do say that fits would be defined by the technical committee. The original ones, the goal was that fits would be defined by a joint committee of TC and board, which I think is what DefCore is. But the language that people have been signing, the majority of those languages say that the fits test would be defined by the TC, and we're not the TC.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is true. The FITS was originally put in there as something that the TC would approve, but I don't know. I mean, I think that's still not an impossible kind of scenario to think
yeah,
about.
I mean, we could get John and Mark and Monty to take it back to the TC and say the board would really like you to approve this.
Yeah.
It's the reverse of what we usually do, but I'm sure it could be made to work.
Okay. So it's and one of the things I think that we're going to do in this process is identify what changes we actually want. This is, to me, one of these things is I actually believe that the community feels strongly enough about core that we could actually present a special election in Atlanta or around Atlanta about this if it became a gating issue for moving forward with core. Everything I've seen, the community is highly engaged in us addressing this. And I think if we presented them with, we have to make a bylaws change to move forward, I think we could. I'd hate to test it, but I think we could. Anyway, so just for clarity, right, we're saying that there are still clarifications needed about trademark. That is potentially a problem, but we could use tests with the license agreements because there's already a fits component, and we can say the tests are fits. So it's potentially enough, but there may be gaps. But are people comfortable saying we're going to move forward without trying to push a bylaws change in December or in the next vote?
It's a kludge and it has risks, but you can probably do it. And I would not want to ever say that, because of my concern about the voting, I would never want to take the position it's absolutely positively necessary. Okay.
Okay. So what I'm noting is that
I feel comfortable with that. Yeah. So I'm sorry, Rob, you were saying what you're going to note?
I'm noting that this has risks, and we may need to have a special vote in April once we have a list.
Okay.
So so what I'm trying to do is drop the urgency of this task, but we'll keep it. So the next question down is, can we make the needed changes in the time frame? And so no, not by December. And so we're saying we can't make the time frame, but we think changes are needed. So we're not going to hold off. We're going to keep this topic alive inside of this cycle. We're not pushing it to the cycle after the elephant cycle. Is that a fair assessment? So Eileen, Mark, that's going to keep the spotlight on you guys in agendas and discussion.
Well, so I guess I'm not sure what that means. I mean, are we going to try to, if it's binary, are we going to try to change it in this election cycle? If so, we need to get the revisions to the bylaws agreed upon, or are we not?
I think we're not.
Okay.
I think that the.
So Rob, but instead you're saying in this cycle, we will complete the work in terms of defining what is in fits. And with that in hand, we have a clear idea of what we need to do in terms of changing bylaws.
Right. I wouldn't say complete. I would say we will have a initial definition of fits.
Okay. Okay.
And for refinement, and then that will almost certainly help us tune what we need in bylaws. The question I'm asking now is, do we want to hold off on bylaws discussions until the next cycle, because we'll have a model of fits at that point, or do we want to keep talking about the bylaws change because of this risk element that Mark's brought up, where we might have to make the bylaws change in April in order to complete FIT's work?
No, I'm afraid if we try to make the change in the bylaws before we actually have as good a definition as to what is FITs, we will end up having to change it again. So it'd be better to hold off on a change until we have good definition.
I think that's insightful, but I also pragmatically think we have a lot of lawyers involved in the DefCore committee, and we might as well take advantage of them to be thrashing some of this out while we're working on the tests. In other words, as a parallel.
That may be fine to have proposed changes, but we're not forcing it to go to a vote.
Agreed. Yeah.
I want us to do the right thing in terms of defining what FITs are and how that works with the trademarks and everything else, and really come to a complete agreement upon that. And then we change the language. We just are so hung up on the language. I think it's getting in the way of doing the real work, which is defining what the test should be testing and everything else.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm noting is, this is excellent. I'm really excited to actually get some of this stuff done and defined. So what I'm noting is some of these we're probably blocked on the bylaws changes until we have a model of the tests. So, which I think is reasonable. And then the next thing is that we want to keep working on it because there's elements of the change that we can start on now and likely need to, we want to have the groundwork laid. So
yes.
We're not putting this issue down, but we're acknowledging it's probably a blocked issue. It's the final results are blocked until we've done the test work.
Correct.
All right. Please review, if you're online, please review the notes. We've got 8-9 people on the Etherpad. Make sure that we've captured the essence of this. Unless somebody objects, I'm ready to move on to the next topic.
Hey, Rob, I was just going to point out that I added the relevant language that talks about the FITS test requirement to the Etherpad. We don't need to go into it. I just wanted everyone to know it's there for reference.
Thank you. Frankly, guys, we actually finished this on time or on for what we expected. All right. So our next.
It was a good discussion, Rob. I think it was. I think we're ending up in a good place. So I think it was great.
Good. I'm looking forward to the continuation. I suspect we're going to need a subcommittee on this. And actually, the next topic is subcommittees. So it's a good tee off. But what I would suggest is that we actually should put subcommittees at the bottom. But we definitely have a bylaws change subcommittee at this point.
Somebody's capturing that.
Eileen, can you lead that for us?
Sure, I'd be happy
to.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we are talking about changes to the trademark framework too, then probably makes sense to bring in Andrew from Venable, who's the trademark lawyer that he knows the most about the existing framework and the implications and where it might make sense to make changes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll bring in Andrew, I'll bring in Mark, and I'll tee that up. No problem at all. Sounds great. Okay, thanks.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to note that as a 5th item in the resolved.
Okay, and do we want this to include bylaws/trademarks? Kind of the whole. I'll just kind of bucketize that into one single subcommittee, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Unless there's any objections. Okay, perfect.
Cool.
All right, Rob. So the other one is the criteria subcommittee. But do you want to, just because not everyone was on this, do you want to very briefly talk about the goal with test selection criteria?
Yes. I'm just looking at the agenda to make sure that we've got the. I think we do. Okay. Yes. So the real agenda item here is to talk about the process of, well, so what I'm going to we're going to talk about the process of the process. I hate meta. But what I'm going to ask us to do is hold off on some of the definition of what the test, the criteria are. If we have time permitting at the end of the meeting, then we'll get into that. The idea here is that we've got a significant body of tests available to us to choose. What we really need to figure out is which of those tests we want to use for the core definition. And the idea is we don't want to just have somebody or a committee going through that list and saying, I like this test, I like that test. We actually want to have some process by which those tests can be weighted and scored for whether or not they should be included in core. And so I'll give some examples. I don't want to discuss the examples so much, but just so you can say. So an example of a test might be, is it one that is implemented on multiple, does it pass on multiple public clouds? Another one, could it be, do we have data that this passes for multiple users in multiple deployments? We could have a test that says, is this code implemented in a way that has multiple backends? Does it support plugins? Does it test plugins? We could actually, we could have open source requirements. Is there an open source capability that's exposed in this or is important? We could have anti components. We could say, well, is this test something that is legally encumbered? Does it have, like, the EC2 APIs could potentially run into a problem if they became core tests? We felt like they were not legally available to us as a test. So the idea is that we want to remove the subjectivity from these tests and start defining some objective criteria that can be used to determine if it's core or not. And that's really, I think, what our first challenge is going to be, is writing these down.
Okay. Would you want to, Rob, would you want to start by saying, it might be easier to say the set of APIs, because then there's multiple tests associated with, the top level sort of is what projects, then the APIs that we think constitute the core of that project, and then the tests that are required to pass.
Well, it's not necessarily APIs, because there are critical sections. There are designated section tests as well.
I agree, but don't they support a particular? I'm just thinking, I can look at a couple hundred APIs, but I can't look at a couple thousand tests.
Well, and that's part of what we would want to be able to, right? There's all these. The idea with the definitions is to create these thresholds. So, right. One of the things that you might say is, well, if most of the tests in this subcomponent are required, then it's, it makes it more likely to make a test required. You could also do the same thing. Like, you could say there should be a higher threshold for the first test of a project to be included than the 50th test, right? So it might be easy to add a test to Nova, but very hard to add the first test to Heat. And the idea is to define, to write that down so we actually can discuss the criteria sort of individually. Like, exactly that point, we should write down that that's a consideration for if the test is included.
I think the parallel for folks who've been involved with this on the board is the gold member selector criteria, right? Or the gold member application criteria, because we originally said, well, we'll just know and we'll think about it, we'll discuss it, and then after the first occasion where we said, well, we are going to make a controversial decision, we'd like to be able to reference the criteria that we applied, and we drafted some, and we ended up expanding that to a full formal committee process. So I think we're getting in front of that a little bit with this to say, because we know this is going to be contentious, let's define the criteria that we're using, rather than doing what we know is right and then describing the criteria that we applied.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the right approach is to take a first stab at that criteria. I still think the precursor to that criteria are some of these goals of core that we talked about last time, one of which is, you know, it is very bad for the community and for users to ever have things go out of core that were in core. And that as a first principle means that core should be kept small. You know, which isn't the criteria that we would apply to a test or an API, but it is the backdrop to how we're thinking about those criteria. It should be harder to get in.
I actually think that is what you just defined is a criteria. That part of the criteria is, are we likely to have to change this test? Is it an is this, how stable is the test? Is the thing that you're testing?
Right.
And so but defining these things in this way actually allows us, and it's probably going to be, hopefully we'll boil it down, but we're going to start with a big set of criteria, just like we did in the principles, and then we're going to boil them down into sort of super criteria that we can then vet and test. And from the spider cycle, this was exactly what we did, and it ended up being very effective, right? A small group of people sort of boiled this huge pot of water down, and we got a roux, and then that was very easy to consume and delicious. And now it's our job to do the same thing. Take all these cool ideas about how the criteria are structured, and then boil them down into a comprehensible set of criteria that everybody can sort of say, okay, now I understand how you're picking these tests.
Right.
That's right, and this is really our January work.
Yes. Although I think some of it's going to happen in December anyway.
But sorry, yeah, it should definitely. We actually should. I think our next meeting is going to be dominated by this.
Yeah.
Unless we have a lot of hanging chads left over from this meeting, which we will, and so it's going to be it's going to be more meetings in December. But I think that the criteria will be really fun. But it's not for this is one of those. They're going to be more protracted meetings, and they're going to be very back and forth, and we'll have some dialogues, and we'll play and test just like we've done before. It's important for people in the committee to understand what we're doing, and that if you don't participate in the first pass of the criteria, you're not missing the criteria definition. You're missing some of the sausage making, if you will.
Yeah. I'm less worried about this one than I am about some of the others, because I think it's actually the criteria themselves should not be ridiculously controversial. Well, they might be, but
I think that
individually,
I don't think they'll be controversial.
Yeah, we've got to start with a small number, less than a dozen criteria that we can quickly get agreement on, because that will shape how we decide what's in, what isn't. But I think, do we need a subcommittee for that, or isn't that really what this committee is supposed to be doing right now? Minus maybe lawyers who want to step out of the technical details.
I guess the reason why I would call it a subcommittee is I want to make attendance optional. I don't mind including everybody.
Okay.
But
initial members, this current group.
Right.
Fine.
Right.
I just started an Etherpad for that test criteria. I mean, maybe a Google Doc is a better thing. But let's
But the idea that, and this is the key thing, what I don't want people to feel like is that DefCore, these meetings are only about that process. That's why I think it's a subcommittee. That subcommittees will be dissolved once we have a workable set.
Fine.
Gotcha.
Okay. Okay. So I think what we've done is we've left the formation of that committee open, and just communicated that we're going to coordinate a bunch of meetings. I think Josh and I will continue to chair that, and we'll continue to invite people to those meetings, and they'll be optional. and likely public to an well. This is, I think, here's the other question on that. How broad an audience do we want to have for that subcommittee?
I don't think there's any particular problem with having it be very broad. I'm thinking that we don't need an infinite number of criteria. We need some fairly well-refined ones, but in the first stage of that, we need to collect any possible criteria that people are going to think should have been in there later, right? So it may be useful to have it be fairly broad.
Okay, so let's then just establish as a principle that we're going to do that work openly.
Yeah.
Which we're not going to do anything in secret, but I think there's a level of broadcast that we can choose to have on some of these intermediate steps. So we'll continue to keep that as a very broad, open forum. Although, just like on this one, I want to be very strict. Do not show up without doing the homework. So we will not, in that process, be reiterating history as a lesson. We'll do it maybe as a discussion, but not as a. We're not going to spend 20 minutes at the beginning talking about why we're having the meeting.
So can we plan on having this subcommittee meeting? Because I somewhat agree with Lou that it's the most important. It's the reason for the season, so to speak. Before the 17th meeting.
Yeah, likely.
I think that would really help define with that. Hopefully that 17th meeting is just cleanup then.
Well, I think that the 17th meeting we've got other agenda items for the 17th.
Yes.
I think I agree that we should have one before then, and then we can report on progress. But to me, the deadline for this criteria is really the end of January, that we should have the boiled down list.
Yeah. Well, to a certain extent, I just, in my own mind, I just assumed that this subcommittee meeting on criteria definition wouldn't be just one, that we would have hopefully a good first start, and then we would have maybe one or two follow-ons in order to gather additional input.
I was hoping we'd do a lot like what we did with the spider, where we started with this huge list of questions, right? It was, I mean, for those of you, I know a lot of you on the phone were on those first meetings. We started with just tons and tons of questions and started answering the questions, and that sort of focused us very effectively. And I'd suggest following the same thing, right? Where we ask a question, we'd start it as questions.
And actually, as I think a testament to how effective you were at running those meetings, Rob, when I presented at the Minnesota meetup, and I basically ran through the image, the process diagram, and answered, asked questions that people had commonly asked and answered them myself, of how we'd answered them so far. And we really didn't have that much, everyone seemed to understand exactly what we're talking about. So I think it was very effective.
Cool.
So
thank you.
To work.
Okay. So we have a sort of a process, we have a timeline, we have delivery, we have the audience. Any other items to cover on the process definition subcommittee? And we understand why we're doing it. Awesome. All right, another agenda item.
Yeah.
Was somebody going to ask a question?
No, sorry, it was Josh. I was just going to say it's going to be useful to have the demo scorecard. I think looking at the demo scorecard out of RefStack will make it easier to think about criteria that can be applied or not applied. But yeah, it's obviously next agenda item, so it's somewhat moved.
Right. I'm looking at the time, so we're going to wrap in 20 minutes. We've got 3 items left to go.
I mean, I can give a very quick RevStack update. There are 3 kind of bigger issues that I've been dealing with. One is resources are short. We got a lot of folks who sort of raised their hand to help, but then have been busy. So the general plea of those of you who have companies behind you, if you can provide resources to help, that would be super helpful. The second is obviously RevStack is really tightly coupled to Tempest at the moment and probably forever, and Tempest has been in a interesting state. I don't know if all of you are sort of aware of the wedged gate stuff that we had over the last couple of weeks, but dealing with non-deterministic test failures in our primary test suite is really problematic when we're looking at like using those tests to certify interop. And so that's certainly been a bit of a distraction. And the other thing is, from what we don't have any mechanism to determine right now is what level of coverage we think we actually have. We know that coverage is low, but we don't really know how low. And there are certainly whole sets of functionality that don't really have tests defined, and so we can't say they must have if the tests don't exist. So those are all the problems we're dealing with right at the moment with RevStack. But on the sort of solution side, I don't have any way to do a screen share now that we turned the Hangout off.
The Join Me is going, and it's Join Me is a view only, is very multi-platform friendly, and we can Skype through it if you want. If you Skype share.
Oh yeah, that would work. Okay.
I can then broadcast the Join Me.
Yeah, that'll work.
Hey, Josh, talking about the test instability and stuff, brought up another question that I don't. If it's been discussed in the notes, and I'm sorry, and if it needs to be its own agenda, we can table this. But I think one of the questions we've had in previous discussions is sort of, do we lock down a version of Tempest that is the Havana version of Tempest and the Icehouse version of Tempest, or is it if you hit a Tempest test at any given day and pass a criteria, like how volatile is the test suite that we're using for FITS? Is it updated once every 6 months? Is it more frequent than that?
Well, so the goal would be that the same way that we have stable Grizzly and stable Havana in each of the core projects, we would have stable Havana in Tempest as well, which is either a branch or a tag. I don't care.
Which alleviates a little bit of the concern about things like the wedged space, or I guess you could still have something that looks good and then wedges when people start trying to use it in real life, but at least we're not trying to chase an unstable Tempest.
Right. Yeah. No, there's no way this works without stability. I mean, I think the design goal from RevStack is to be able to point it at a particular tag and say use Tempest as of this tag.
Right. Okay. That's what I expected. I just didn't want to assume that.
Yeah. Yeah. Why can't I not share screen with you, Ron? Oh, because you're away.
You got to start. We have to start a video call. Oh, yeah. I marked myself as busy. Hold on. There you go.
Come back. No, I still can't share screen. Weird. Maybe I should just join me, and then I can. Let's just maximize the amount of awkward technical problems we can have in the first meeting. Go back to meeting in person.
We could go back to the Hangout.
No, that's not funny.
That was a joke. Sorry.
Almost funny, but not. I'm connecting to Join Me. I wonder if you can pass me.
I can, but I don't. You can't do it from the web only, but I'll try.
Oh, I'm hitting request control.
Oh, there you
go. I can now control your computer. That's not helpful.
Oh.
Never mind.
Really? Do you actually have control of me? That'd be awesome.
Yes. Watch, I'm going to move your mouse.
You do? Yeah, I think you're grabbing my mouse. Stop!
Sorry.
All right, let's see. There you go. But
okay,
I can make you the presenter, which is what you want.
Oh, and then I can download Join Me. It'll take 2 seconds. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So while we work out the technical for this, let me look at the agenda and see what else we want to talk about. Okay, that worked.
Yes, but I'm totally in the wrong place. Okay. So I was just going to show this, a couple of things. How many? I think most people have seen this before.
So let me just put a little bit of perspective on. So the idea is that RefStack is going to be the aggregation tool where we pull together what tests are doing, and we use that as a collection point for allowing people to validate, OpenStack users and implementations to validate and share their results. So one of the things that's necessary in all this, especially because our broader goal is interop, is that we have a way for people to share and compare their scorecards against not just the core test, but the broader suite of tests. So
and actually, let me just emphasize this point for Troy Toman. What you brought up is RefStack is not raw tests; it's mappings. And so, in order for us to say the capability of floating IP actions, or the list floating IPs capability, may have 15 different tests behind it, we're only going to show one line in RefStack, which is really, did these 15 tests as a mini suite or a subsuite pass? And therefore, are we confident that this capability functions or does not function on that particular environment? Because otherwise, you're right, we're looking at thousands, and we can't think about thousands, but we can think about hundreds. And I think we can reasonably go through hundreds, and then we've done our best to sort of roll them up. The rolling up is quite primitive at the moment, needs some work.
Josh, that's good. That's what I was trying to achieve.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Sorry, go ahead, Rob. I wanted to make sure people were clear. When we say test, we're talking about a capability.
And that's actually one of the things that we want to help bring in with this. And we've talked about this individually. It's worth bringing to the whole committee. Is that we're expecting to collect not just the test results. So what we wanted to have happen is it's not just a matter of having RefStack run an agent and test API endpoints on a public cloud. We've been talking about uploading your Tempest results from an internal run as your own RefStack results, or being able to upload the results of that, if not the Tempest data itself, and sign it as using your OpenStack account ID. And I talked to Jonathan and Mark about this and trying to figure out, sort of trying to get these things moving. But to have individuals in the community be able to update and say, this is my implementation run, and then have the licensees, the official organizations, sponsors, say those individuals can produce results that my company says are my official results. So there's actually a transparent and sort of a identity-driven system that says this is the community results for OpenStack, which is where we brought in the idea of being able to say these capabilities were ones that I think are core or not based on my use. And then there's another place we take this that becomes the voting system, and then we can actually create all this work and move it towards interop. But it's transparent, it's community driven, it allows people to have a voice, which I think is really important. And then there's another aspect to this, which is that we can collect additional data. So it's not simply, here's my Tempest result, but what we'd like to be able to do is say, this is my, like what we collect out of the user committee. Here's the size of my pool. This is the version that I'm running. Well, we'll have that. This is the operating system. This is how I deploy it. This is, different aspects. We actually were thinking of tags that would let people include, I'm using Neutron with Linux bridges or VLANs, or this backing system. These plugins are enabled for me. I'm using these hypervisors, and actually start using this as a way to collect not just test results, but really implementation preferences.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more potential. We're not going to balloon the scope out for right now, but so people can see the foundation.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any of the tools necessary to go through a Tempest run and turn that into votes, essentially, like you're talking about?
So we don't have the voting overlay yet. We have an RFE of that. And actually, just to be clear, so Tempest generates subunit results, and subunit results we store in an intermediate format, and then they can be uploaded into RefStack and turned into a scorecard on the website, or you can generate the scorecard locally. The idea of being able to go through and say, I want to vote for these being must-haves, is a level of metadata. That's what we're trying to get done as quickly as possible, but realistically, it's going to be January. Which is part of our timeline of saying, okay, well, when we can get this out into the hands of the community and get people starting to submit their own votes for what's must-have, means A, we've got to have the voting mechanism, and B, we have to be fairly comfortable with the mapping and grouping of the tests to these capabilities. Which I think we're getting close. We've got the sort of original design diagrams for how RefStack was put together. What is somebody saying? Are you screen sharing? I'm not seeing anything beyond the gray screen. Yes, I'm screen sharing. Can anyone else see?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, John Dickinson can't, but it's probably because he's running Linux or something. I will mock your Linux install later. If it was just Gentoo, you would be fine. Yeah, so there's this goal of being able to run it locally and run it remotely. There's a set of command line tools that work pretty well. The parsing and the sort of standard readable format stuff works. It's all roughly there, but it is definitely lacking firepower to get it to 100% right at the moment. Certainly a lot of the sort of watching the test status stuff is pretty raw, so while the tests are running, you don't really know what's going on. Generally, the running by CLI tools works much better than running from the web interface. What else? Oh, and then there's a MindMeister page for those of you who care about the data model. This is particularly of interest for us, trying to work with the foundation folks to get the users and vendor stuff integrated. We populated the original list of RefStack vendors from the list that we got from Jonathan and Mark, but these were only the vendors that we actually had contact email for, so we only have 16 of the sort of 100 licensees or so. And we're not really sure about these contact info, but they are the ones who are authoritative contacts, at least for the training programs, I believe. So there's some work to do here. I think from the committee side, probably we need an effort to get a contact person in each of these 100 or so vendors and say, hey, if you want to be involved in core definition, and even if you don't, we kind of need your test results. Do you have someone we could work with as a point of contact, or do you just want to give us admin credentials to your cloud and we'll take it from there? Sorry, I almost got that with a straight face.
I was going to say my preference is that we get the subunit representations, but yes, admin rights to clouds are always appreciated.
Yeah, I just think it would be way more fun if everyone just gave me admin credentials on their public cloud and I could run the tests myself.
So one of the things that we had talked about doing was actually, and we probably need to establish a date for this, to basically make all the data effectively alpha, upload test results, things like that. None of it's official, it's all experimental. And then at some point, probably in the last 30 days or something like that, actually wipe the databases and then start with collecting official data. And so we need to, I don't think it's time yet, but we probably need to formalize the idea that this is all the data is going to be reset on March 1st or something like that. We might want. And again, can we just make that decision? So
March 1st.
Why don't we just say on March 1st we're going to reset all the RefStack data.
What I'd rather do is make sure we have two RefStack. I mean, we already have two RefStack instances running now, one that's dev and one that's prod. And say, as of, let's say, February 1st, we'll scrub prod, because we're going to use them both as dev in the meantime, and start collecting real data. But that way, if folks are are doing diff analysis of their own environments and kicking tires on RefStack, it's not going to all go away in the dev environment on March 1st. I mean, one of the things that David's trying to make sure happens is that this all gets into the OpenStack infra team, and it's being run by the same guys on Monty's team, rather than just the cobbled together stuff we have on HP Cloud right now. We're likely to run out of capacity on my not free HP account. And I think those guys were all distracted with the wedged gate thing as well. So but I think that's a good idea. I would just say let's run 2 environments instead of 1, and then we always have one that's only for authoritative data.
So are you saying February 1st or March 1st?
Well, I think for prod we should scrub it on February 1st.
Okay.
It gives us more time, right? And it'll be about the same time that we have potentially community members who could submit test runs.
Okay.
All right. Do we have a volunteer who wants to try and round up point of contact info for all of the licensees?
Yeah, this is Mark. I'll sign up for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Otherwise, they're going to feel like we ignored them and we didn't care, which might be true, but it's not friendly.
And what I'm hoping we'll do is when we get this to a point where we've actually can have people start uploading this, we'll go community and we'll ask people to upload the results. Right. This is why I want the scrub. I want to be able to say in January, please upload your results, test it, see what's going on, just work through the process, sign up for your healthcare now, and then we'll reset and then say, okay, this time we're actually doing the authoritative answers. Go through it again. We've worked out the bugs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we won't build the right thing unless we get early feedback. Rob, I passed the presenter back to you. Is that still sharing my screen though, or no?
No, you're done.
Okay.
We should be back to me showing. Let me make sure I've got the right screen.
Yeah, I can see your stuff.
Okay. And screen.
And question 5, it feels like you're kind of trolling us, because I'm pretty sure the outcome from the last discussion was that we would defer this for the elephant cycle. Do we just want to restate and agree on that publicly?
This one? The gaps?
Multiple levels.
Oh. I didn't mean to troll. So this is, I'm looking at the clock. Yeah, we did. And I think the project program that we need to have this. We're going to just postpone it till the next meeting. The idea with this multiple levels, I'd happily put it to bed, if we can, is that we're almost certainly going to have a much smaller core than people are going to be comfortable with. And we've said, a whole bunch of people have been saying this. I've heard a lot of people want this, that it's small. The concern is that in selecting the criteria, we're going to end up with these people are important, but they're not core. Do we want to create a criteria bucket for them right from the start so that we don't?
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
I know this could be a can of worms, but we talked about this the other day, which is that I think what you're actually talking about is what tests must pass, and you're using the word core, which is
Thank you. Yes, you're right.
A very loaded word, and so I think it might be helpful to just call it what it is, which is the must-pass tests. And you're saying there probably won't be a lot. When you say a small core, what you mean is you suspect when we're done, the initial set of must-pass tests will be a short list. Is that fair? What restatement?
That is yes. That is a much more accurate way to say it. There would be a small must-pass list, and so I guess what I'm doing is I'm jumping towards people's translation of a small must-pass list means that there's a lot of things that people believe are core to OpenStack but aren't covered in the must-pass list. And so the next question is, that's, you know, if it's very binary and there's no middle ground, then I anticipate that we're going to have challenges from people fighting to get into that must-pass list. And so the idea here is, do we want to start with a middle ground that says, well, you're not must-pass, but we still think you're a commonly used test.
Well, I mean, I would reverse the argument and say, is there a case that there's anything for which we have tests that are projects or programs that are in StackForge and have Tempest coverage that are not part of either Commons or must-pass? In other words, is it not the Barber of Seville? Anything that we're talking about and evaluating is either part of must-pass or it's part of Commons?
I think there's probably, I would hope that we have tests for edge function that is not
true.
implemented widely. So cells or, right, any of the newer capabilities are going to be clearly edge. And so what I'm concerned about, what I'm being, sorry.
How about
let me finish this thought.
Sure.
What I'm concerned about is that we're going to have common functionality that are like, well, everybody does that, but we're going to say, but it's not must. It's still important function. And I'm trying to preempt the argument where we create criteria to include something or exclude something just because of this weird gray zone.
Right. Okay. I agree that our discussions around saying, you know, quote unquote core, although nobody likes the word, and Commons and Edge feel like the right buckets. I'm concerned that if we get into formalizing those buckets right now, we may bite off more than we can chew, to use the elephant analysis.
Yeah. So what we're going to say is must pass. I think we've clearly identified. So that we have level one, and we have option. You know, and so what we have is we have some other level.
Yeah, we have at least one other level, but probably two other levels. And it may be useful to say there are two other levels and not worry about the terms, but then we have a bucket for saying these things clearly are supported by many clouds, but are not considered to be core. And these things are either not supported by many clouds or aren't supported by anyone, even though there are tests for them, and those would be considered to be edge.
So how about this is a very simple, because I don't know why this is all of a sudden making sense. How about if we have must-pass tests and we have must-pass candidates, and everything else is everything else?
What is a must-pass candidate? It's like incubation?
Yes.
Can we define this in a slightly different way? Can we define it in different levels of interoperability? Would that help make it more clear?
Yes, it would.
Essentially,
what are you thinking, Sean?
Well, I would think the most maybe working back from the most exotic that we'd want to see is if and when we get to the point where we're able to move workloads between clouds without any kind of a stateful workload migration. You know, that would be the most exotic that we'd want to get to, all the way down to I can't think, would be the most basic interoperability kind of hybrid that I can move my my image from my one cloud to another. Right, that'd be I think
it's transparent. Yeah, you basically have transparent.
So I mean, between those two things, there are a lot of things, obviously, but one of them I don't think anybody's quite or not going to be there for probably a number of years, but between those things, we can maybe figure out those levels you're talking about. Because essentially for ourselves, or either internally like Yahoo's looking at inward, but everyone else is looking at customers. That's what the customers are looking for. They want to be able to fire up a bunch of stuff internally or with different data centers within their own company, and then maybe even burst out or different regions move workloads between different companies, different data centers, and they want to know what are the limitations. What can I do? What can't I do?
Okay, so you're talking about something that's 40 fully portable, likely portable, right? And then we have...
Sure. I guess that's a way of breaking it down, yeah. I mean, ultimately... Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think I like Sean's definition of likely portable better than the term must-pass candidate. And the reason, the problem I have with the use of the word candidate is similar to the problem I have with the incubation phase. Is we've made a very bad habit of just saying you are on the golden path now, and it ends with you arriving in nirvana. And I think the point of commons, the way we talked about it the other day, is that these are things that probably never should be part of core, but they are nonetheless important and acknowledged to be common across many of these cloud environments.
Right.
And so yeah. I don't want a layer that implies that they are on a journey to being somewhere more than where they are.
So from this perspective, right, we have must-pass, commons, and edge are ones that seem.
So I'd like to slightly amend. I like the summarization of making it saying. Or summarizing what I was talking about as portability. But I think there's a slight variation of that because there's going to be different implementations of different types of, I'm not exactly sure how you summarize this, but different types of, let's say, within one company, they maybe will be running different versions of clouds that would maybe be using Nova or not using Nova, but would be compatible or interoperable. So how would we define that interoperability? Because we'd want to be able to.
That's deferred. That's explicitly deferred. OpenStack compatible is an explicitly deferred for Elephant Cycle.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
True.
All right.
I love being able to punt that one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm reining you in. But I do think you said something very clever there, which was. I'm gonna lose it. Crap. Gone. Sorry. No, it was about the interop and the expectation of interop and discoverability. And I think the other way to say commons is likely, and this may be too technical, but everything in a must-have test can be discovered from the Keystone endpoint. In other words, you can hit Keystone and it will tell you what services are running, and you can hit the services and they will tell you what APIs they have. And it is likely that everything in OpenStack Commons is service discoverable in the same fashion. Now, that's one of the guarantees of interop. It is possible that things in Edge are not service discoverable. And that may be a good criteria to apply.
Okay, now you're getting into criteria. I'm going to hold you back. I'm going to pull you back on that.
Okay, fair enough.
We're over time, but I think we actually accomplished something useful. Mark, I think you and I had talked about this interoperability contract. Makes a ton of sense, and fully portable is the target. So our must-pass tests, the idea is that they are trying to uphold an interoperability contract to become fully portable.
Yeah.
For fully portable workloads. I think if it's all right with people, we'll accept the concept of a commons where there's extended interoperability and it's likely portable, because I think we're just going to need to use that bucket for things. And then we're deferring flavor-specific extended interoperability which is one of the places where Sean was going, which I think is important, but we just don't have time for. And then the concept of edge, where there's no interoperability contract. But I actually think that the last 10 minutes we've done something really useful for us, which is always good.
Whereas everything before the last 10 minutes was a total colossal waste.
Well, it justifies going over time. I get it. In the hallway with Adele, running a meeting over time requires somebody to have a rationale. You have to have
so Rob, just to clarify for the lawyers on the phone, this is a use of the word contract that has nothing to do with what you think of as a contract.
It's a meta use of contract. We love meta uses of contract.
It's an interface contract as opposed to a legal contract.
I appreciate the lawyering of the anti-lawyer.
I'd just like to bring you all back to the most important part of the meeting. Josh, I believe, said that I said something clever. So it's like
yes. Very true.
The most important part for me. Please continue.
So we're going to defer the program versus project. I kicked off a thread on the board list. We're going to need to talk about this, but we'll just have to wait until the next topic. But I would suggest if we want to do discussion on the board list, we should do that. Without any other closing comments before we close?
We will let you have the last word.
Excellent.
Thanks, Rob.
I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you. Great meeting, everybody. Good kickoff.
Thanks for driving this, guys.
Good time. All right, bye.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Okay. Hangout is, I'm officially stopping the Hangout.
All right, so where were we?
Okay, so Rob is going to summarize the thinking that got us to saying, hey, we probably need a bylaws change. It will be challenging to summarize because it was like 2.5 hours of discussion out of a 7-hour meeting. But it is worth summarizing